Hello everybody. Today another little quick video where I share my thoughts on something happening in the automotive world. And today we're discussing Ferrari. A very interesting company and certainly a very odd one. And I say that with the greatest of respect for them. I have worked with Ferrari and they are definitely a unique brand to work with. They are not like any other that I've worked with, and their products indeed are also quite different to anything else on the market. And I'm sure they're quite happy for me to say that because, well, when you are one of the most powerful brands in the world, you are naturally going to want to do everything you can to differentiate yourself from your competition and indeed everyone else. In fact, in the financial world, I am told that Ferrari is not considered a car maker, it is instead considered a luxury goods maker. And they don't get to that position by accident. Now, one of the things with Ferrari is that if you look at their model lineup over the past sort of 30 years, it is generally quite predictable. You have the base V8 entry-level sports car. You've then got your flagship V12 supercar, Super GT, whatever you want to call it. And barring a couple of surprise changes, like the move from a mid-engine flat 12 to front-engine V12, and the introduction of the front-engine V8 cars, they've been pretty dependable. In fact, since the 328 for the V8 sports cars, Ferrari have alternated on a very set pattern. Every 5 years, a new model will come out, and they generally introduce either a new chassis or a new engine or a heavily revised version of the other. Now, for example, the 355 is a mild evolution of the 348's chassis, but with a heavily revised engine. The 360 has an engine which is very, very close to the 355, but is a totally different chassis, and so on and so forth. But this year, they seem intent on surprising us all. Everybody knows that Ferrari are working on an SUV, but that is apparently still a good year or two away from release. And no doubt it's going to be very typically Ferrari when it does come out. However, this year Ferrari have announced 3 vehicles, or at least in the last 18 months, let's say, 3 vehicles which are all a little bit of a surprise. The first was the F8 Tributo. Now, if you look at that pattern of mid-engine V8 Ferraris, you'll see that the 488 was essentially the 458 platform, but evolved with a radically new engine. And so, the 488-2 should have been essentially the 488 engine with some mild tweaks and a completely new chassis. However, the F8 is very much the same sort of platform. It's the same car. It is still a member of the 458 family, if you want to call it that. And so for Ferrari to spin off 3 generations out of the same platform is actually quite unusual. Now, they have done that with the California platform, which has gone from California to Cali T to Portofino, but it's not really quite the same. And so that's the first big surprise. It's a little bit of a question mark as to what Ferrari are doing there, whether the F8 Tributo is going to get the full sort of 5-year run that you'd expect, whether it's going to be a very short vehicle, is it going to get a pista version, is there going to be, you know, an F8 Challenge Stradale, or are they saying that the 488 Pista, which is still officially in production, is that car? Is it going to happen? Nobody really seems to know. And the big question mark, of course, is like, okay, you've just announced the F8 Tributo. It's the tribute to your V8 engine and its heritage, and the car's filled with all these little nods to many of Ferrari's greatest mid-engine V8 cars. So are you saying that this is then the last of line? Is the next car going to be a V6 hybrid, as many rumour that it will? The thing is that if you go back a couple of years, you'll see articles where people have said, yes, Ferrari are announcing a new V6 hybrid car in the next few months. This is before the F8 was actually announced. So it's really unclear where the F8 is going to sit and if we're going to see a continuation of V8 powered cars for the entry-level Ferrari sports car, or if it is indeed going to change to V6 hybrid power. We all know that McLaren are introducing a new sports series car which is likely to be V6 hybrid, so for Ferrari to do the same thing would make an awful lot of sense, and it'll make a hell of a lot more sense in just a minute. The other big surprise, of course, was the Roma, which is going to be the new front-engine V8 coupe, something Ferrari haven't done, certainly not in the modern era. And an alternative really to the Portofino, which is a car that I actually really liked, and Roma also is going to be introducing a lot of new stuff, new interior design language, all that sort of stuff for Ferrari. That's perhaps not the really surprising car. The big one, the real shocker, is SF90. When that was announced, I have to say I was very, very confused. I just couldn't understand where the SF90 sat in the landscape. When I first saw the numbers, I assumed that this was going to be possibly the follow-on to LaFerrari, but it became very clear that that wasn't the case. This was a series production car. It was a new tier of vehicle from Ferrari. Pricing is interesting too, because it's going in at a price point that's almost sort of unexplored at the moment. The car is going to be, I'm told, just under £400,000 base price. But what is interesting is that you're probably not going to add as much onto it in terms of options as you would with other cars, because it's going to come with a lot more as standard. So in reality, I would expect cars to be sort of maybe £420,000, £430,000, then a bit more if they do a Spider version, which seems quite likely. So that's more than you would pay for, say, a V12 Lamborghini Aventador. It's obviously more than you would pay for a current front-engine Ferrari V12, although not actually that much more, because you could option something like the GTC4 Lusso to well over £300,000. Their current demonstrator has a list price of £332,000. So another 100 grand on top of that. It's a lot of money. Of course it's a lot of money, but it's another 30%. So it's not a huge jump. It's not another like 200% or something like that. It's also then, of course, way shy of what a new flagship hypercar would actually be, because those traditionally are sort of the £1 million mark, if not a lot more. And so I just didn't get it. I just didn't understand what SF90 was. And then I realised the SF90 is actually, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most exciting, interesting and unusual cars that Ferrari have introduced in a very long time. And looking at the sort of performance automotive landscape, I think it's an incredibly exciting car. You see, for the last sort of 2 decades, we've seen the growth of this category of hypercar. It's just exploded. You now have manufacturers like Pagani and Koenigsegg making cars on scales that they haven't before, and these are not cheap vehicles. You know, everyone will tell Harry Metcalf that he's silly for selling his Zonda, and his video on why he did that is actually very, very interesting and very relatable, I'm sure, for the sort of people that have owned those kind of cars when they weren't worth silly money. But those cars that started off at sort of a similar price, you know, a few £100,000, and are now millions, well, that's become quite a big market. But it's not a sort of market that people like myself are ever going to be able to enter into. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that the Tim Shmee150 has an amazing collection of cars, but even he would say that to put a hypercar in there, a real full-blooded, you know, couple of £1 million hypercar, would be a very serious thing. I mean, we look at stuff like the Senna and think of it as a hypercar, but actually a Pagani Huayra would be like triple the cost of that. Then you've got insane running costs, all that sort of stuff. Allegedly, one of the reasons that the Bugatti Veyron didn't appreciate in the same way as stuff like, say, an Enzo was because the thing cost the same as a small helicopter did to run. And even multi-millionaires do not like spending 30 grand on a service. There's a very interesting thread on Piston Heads where someone pointed out the running costs of a McLaren Mercedes SLR, and that's no doubt one reason that those cars are actually relatively cheap to buy in comparison to their rivals at the time. But back to the SF90, why is it so important? Well, you read the specs and it does read like a sort of bullet point list of a modern day hypercar. 1,000 horsepower, twin turbo, V8 with hybrid power, drives all 4 wheels, which is very unusual for a Ferrari sports car. It looks amazing. Of course, it's going to be full of all these cool little Ferrari tweaks, nods, and little design curios that make the brand what it is. It's wide, it's low, it's aggressive, and it's going to perform pretty darn well, I'm reasonably confident. A lot of other manufacturers would have packaged that car and sold it for the full £1 million. The numbers are well in excess of either, say, the McLaren Senna or the Elva. They're much closer in some way to the Speedtail. Speedtail's £1.75 million plus whatever. So Ferrari, I think, has kind of tripped up its competitors, because it's now said, okay, we, Ferrari, are going to sell a 1,000 horsepower hybrid hypercar for 400 grand. Ferrari have just hit the reset button for the market, and they've gone, this is what we're going to sell this for. And I think it's most surprising for this to have come from Ferrari, of all people. And I suspect a lot of their rivals are going to be sat there going, Oh, you know, we were just hoping that we were going to keep bumping the prices up and up and up and up and up. And so now, if you are a company that's charging 2 million quid for a car of this performance, you're going to have to be doing something exceedingly special to justify that, as far as I'm concerned. But even that's not the most exciting thing. The most exciting thing for me is the fact that they're 400 grand. Yes, a hell of a lot of money. Not as much money as it once was, I should point out. And because this isn't going to be a limited production vehicle, this is a series production car. I'm sure production will sell out if it hasn't already. But because this is not a limited vehicle, with any luck, it might even depreciate a little bit. Which means that one day, maybe, things go really well on the channel, I can actually afford one. Which suddenly means that I am really interested in it, because when they release cars like La Ferrari, I mean, it's an amazing, cool, brilliant thing, but I look at it and I go, yeah, it's £1 million now, and it'll be £2 million tomorrow, and it'll be £3 million next week, and I can't enter that world. I cannot compete at that level, just can't do it. But I've seen cars that have been this expensive before come out, or, you know, near enough, and they will come down. You know, F12, once upon a time, was a completely unobtainable car for me, but now, in a few years, it is a car that I might be able to afford. And maybe the same will happen with SF90. It's a new breed of car. It's very interesting. It's very exciting. I hope Ferrari continue to do it. And you could definitely, absolutely make the argument that it is far more car than anyone would ever need. But quite frankly, I think that's kind of the point of a hypercar, if not a supercar as well. And so I think that's really quite amazing. It's a car that actually suddenly, ordinary people, you know, obviously still going to require a lot of money to buy and run one of these things. But it actually is the sort of car that could actually be within reach. I mean, let's face it, if you can afford to buy a brand new Aventador with options, SF90 is probably affordable. A McLaren 720 Spider with a lot of options is already a price tag that starts with a 3. If you pay a visit to MSO, you're going to be getting there. So this is real game-changing stuff. This is mega performance for not a lot of cash. And I'm, for one, very excited. The other thing that this does, of course, is it dramatically changes the marketplace. It's created a new price point for Ferrari. But it's also asking the question, what's going to happen to the F8 category? What's going to happen to the entry-level V8 now? Because with SF90 being here, there's only so far that the entry-level V8 mid-engine car can go. So perhaps they're maybe even thinking of recalibrating that, and with it going to V6, they're going to hold the prices where they are, perhaps even drop them a little bit, because this would then give Ferrari the opportunity to sort of, say, price the car a little bit more aggressively, maybe a little closer to McLaren Sports Series territory rather than Super Series, and really go after that kind of market. Now, in truth, Ferrari don't really care about the sales of any of their competitors, and they're not too fussed about their cars either. They always benchmark themselves against themselves and, of course, whoever else that they like. But it is interesting to think about, isn't it? It is exciting. It is a curious thing, because Ferrari will have definitely, absolutely given this some thought. There will have been a lot of meetings as to how this is all going to work, how this is going to fit in their strategy. And what I'm most interested to see is that historically, Ferrari will have a lot of buyers that say exclusively go for V8 cars or exclusively go for V12s. And with this car now occupying a position that in many ways is above the V12s, we're really keen to see if they actually nab some of those customers as well, or whether the guys that like their V12s stick with those. That is going to be, well, interesting to watch and see unfold. I doubt I'm going to get a go in an SF90, because it is going to be still, although not a limited production car, not one with a huge production run, so chances of having a play in one are pretty small, but I'm very excited nonetheless for what happens, because I think this is a pretty cool car. A pretty exciting moment as well. Please tell me what you think in the comments down below. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.